The auto-reply said out of office. He wasn't. Hook. The first thing that didn't add up was the autoresponder. I'll be off-grid at a cabin this weekend. My husband's email told anyone brave enough to write him after hours. Minimal reception. Back Monday. The second thing was the rideshare receipt that landed on our shared credit card. A 12-minute trip at midnight to a place called the Glassworks, a converted factory on the river with lofts you need a favor to get into. The third thing was a photo on a gallery's tagged stories at 12:31 a.m. A shot of a rooftop party where the city looked like it was flattering itself reflected in the river. In the corner, you could see a sliver of my husband's jacket and the man whose arm rested like punctuation on the back of it. My name is Mark. I'm 35 and I write copy that teaches apps to sound less robotic than I feel some days. My husband is Evan. He teaches architecture and can sketch a room into existence with a pencil he's borrowed from a stranger. 4 years into our marriage, we had become precise and careful with each other, like people carrying a priceless vase through a hallway that had survived too many parties. We kissed on our way to work and slept back to back, and I told myself intimacy has seasons. As if love were weather and not a series of choices you either show up for or don't. At noon the next day, I forwarded his own autoresponder to him like a joke. "Cabin's gorgeous," I wrote. "How are the bears?" 3 minutes later, a message arrived from a number I didn't know. "If you want to know where he actually sleeps, come to the Glassworks at 4. Back freight elevator, 3rd floor, door will be open. Ask for Tyler." My hand did a small, ugly tremor and then went still the way the surface of a lake does when something large has decided to swim under it. The Glassworks is the kind of building that pretends it was born knowing how to be expensive. The old brick was clean, too clean, and the new glass knew it. In the lobby, a guard looked up as if remembering faces is an art form he still practices. I told him my name and said I was expected, and he nodded toward a freight elevator whose gate had learned manners. The cab rattled up the shaft as if to announce me to a floor that didn't need introductions. When the doors opened, the sound that hit me was not music, but conversation pretending it wasn't eavesdropping. A hallway paneled in old maple led to a door that was more wall than door. It stood open like a question. The loft beyond it had made a sport of light. The river ran along the glass like it had been hired. Plants arranged themselves in corners the way people pretended they weren't flirting. And near the far window, a man with a face you forgive in advance poured water into a heavy glass tumbler and looked up like he knew precisely what a stranger arriving does to the color of a room. He wore no jacket, just a white shirt open one button more than manners suggest, and a black watch strap that made his wrist look like it had been measured for danger. "Mark," he said, his voice was careful without being afraid, "I'm Tyler." "What am I expected to do with that?" I asked. It wasn't an insult, it was a request for terms. He smiled in a way that refused to be read as triumph. "Whatever you want," he said, "including leave, but you came up, which means you want something I can either name or witness." He handed me the water as if heat were a thing that could be poured from one mouth to another. My husband was not in the room. His absence had the weight of a piece of furniture you move and forget where it used to live. Tyler watched me read the space like a blueprint. His eyes did not apologize. A smudge of charcoal lived near his cuff, the polite ghost of a morning in a studio. I wanted to be noble and failed in the ordinary way. I looked at his collarbone where the skin goes thin, and I thought of all the ways he could know my husband's hands better than I do. "You texted me from a stranger's number," I said. He held up the phone in question as if to concede the point. "Because I didn't want you to feel like he'd asked me to send the invitation," he said. "He didn't. He told me there was a version of him he had been using here that didn't deserve to go home anymore. I told him then he had to go home and return it himself. He said he couldn't stand being looked at while he did. I thought maybe you would prefer it be someone he was already ashamed of. The freight door slid again. Evan stepped into the loft like he belonged in a photograph. He wore our wedding ring and a shirt I hadn't ironed. He saw me first and then Tyler, and every unpracticed thing on his face arrived before the expression he intended to wear did. He did not reach for me. He looked at my glass instead, as if water were an old friend he was glad to see again. You should have told me the cabin had a concierge, I said. I wrote that autoresponder in April, he said, when I thought I would be the kind of man who says no before he needs to. I didn't change it. You kissed him, I said, because sometimes you must unwrap a gift before you decide if it's a bomb. I kissed him, he said, twice. Once because it felt like the edge of a roof I wanted to survive. Once because I wanted to be the person who chooses instead of the person who catalogs and apologizes. His hands did that small, restless thing a dancers do when they are trying to stand like civilians. Both times I said your name. Both times I kept going. Tyler leaned back against the window and watched us with a decency that made me hate him a little less and myself a little more. He did not speak. He worked at not existing more than he already did. It was almost erotic, that kind of restraint, the way a city is erotic when it behaves for no one in particular. I took a step toward Evan, and then away from him and then back, a choreography I would rather not have performed in front of a man who knew how to assign meanings to distance. Evan closed whatever space remained and put his hand where it belongs, just below my shoulder blades, in that cruel and tender square that resets my breathing and my arguments with one press. We stayed inside implication. My mouth found the place near his ear that belongs to me. Tyler did me the courtesy of looking at the river. You think I want a villain, I said into last night's damp on Evan's collar. You think if you give me one I'll spare you the scene. I think you're tired, he said. I think drama eats the oxygen and then pretends it was mercy. I think you want to know if I want you or if I want to be seen wanting anything. He touched the other side of my ribs with his free hand, the place where I keep the parts of me that pretend they're safe because they've become boring. What do you want? I asked, because the ash of my temper had finally gotten bored. I want you out loud, he said, and I'm terrified I'm only good at wanting when someone new is watching. Tyler finally blinked. He came away from the window just far enough to be heard. He told me he loves you, he said. He loves you like an honest sentence. He loves me like a question with a good body. I told him I don't do scaffolding. I told him I'd prefer to be an exit. If I did a charitable thing this month, it was making sure I'm the person who leaves instead of the person who stays and eats. The glass in my hand had begun to sweat. Heat collected where the tumbler met my skin. Tyler's pupils were steady. He took one step that made the room reverse direction, and he stood in front of me with the expertise of a man who has had to practice being decent beyond his instincts. He reached out, and with 2 fingers, adjusted the knot of my tie by a fraction of an inch. The image was rude by design and gentle by execution. YouTube would have called it suggestive. My chest let its guard dog sit for a moment. Do you want me to leave? He asked, the way a surprising waiter asks if you want dessert and means, do you want to be humane to yourself tonight? Yes, I said, because honesty and urgency make the same noise in the throat if you're paying attention. Thank you, I added, because my mother loves me. He nodded once to me and once to my husband and went. The gate clanked. The loft inhaled. Evan's body inclined toward me again like it had its own small gravity. He kissed me this time, not like an apology or an audition, but like he had been told he'd reached the last page of a script and was being given a monologue that might save his life if he meant it. I kissed him back because I was tired of letting principals keep the lights off. We kept it clean enough for cameras and dirty enough that the window understood discretion. My hands remembered the seam of his shirt and the hitch where his jacket expects a button to fight back. His mouth made decisions and then asked for permission. Water remained in the glass on the table, and I decided that's what made the room forgiving. He pressed his mouth along the line of my jaw like a man making braille of the life he intends to use. The river kept resisting interpretation, and that was also erotic. After, we stood apart long enough to count our bad decisions in breaths instead of speeches. Evan touched the inside of my wrist with his thumb the way he does when he needs to convince my heart to hire him again. It worked, which is unsexy as a sentence, but it's how trust sometimes behaves. "I'll tell you everything you want," he said. "I'll tell you nothing you don't. You get to pick. I'll leave tonight if you say. I'll leave for a week if you say. I'll sleep on the floor facing the door if you think that's poetry." "Come home," I said, "but don't make the door sentimental, make it useful." I looked at the window and the river and the city's refusal to behave, and then back at the man I married. Also, stop writing autoresponders before you actually know where you're going. We walked to the elevator holding hands like men who know they're being watched and prefer to get it over with. In the cab, at a red light, he put his mouth near my ear and counted silently to 5 like he does when he wants to prove he remembers how my nervous system is wired. At home, we didn't turn on the overhead light. We put a square of blue painter's tape on the kitchen window and wrote 807 above it with the pencil that hangs behind the calendar. We stood there the next night and let the minute do its job. His hand went where it belongs. The city did its affidavit. We didn't narrate it. At 8:12, we named 3 facts and 2 fears and 1 request without prosecuting. We poured water into our fancy glasses and clinked as if that counted as religion. We went to bed and slept at the same temperature again, which felt like someone had turned the thermostat on my better self. 2 weeks later, I saw Tyler sitting on the ledge outside the glassworks, a brown bag at his feet and his tie loosened to the exact degree that made me think of sin as an algebra problem. He lifted 2 fingers in a hello that had the decency to be small. I nodded back with a face I have practiced more than I prefer to admit, the one that says I am not noble, but I am finished with the version of myself that thinks withholding is a personality. At 3:15 that day, my phone buzzed with a push alert no one admitted to programming. "Listen to 11 seconds of water," it said. I did. "Present/bus stop," I texted. "Present/model shop," Evan wrote, which in our language means I'm sanding sharp edges so you don't walk into them in the dark. People ask if there was a villain. They want a man with perfect hair, or a building with arrogant windows, or a husband who couldn't tell the difference between trouble and proof he was alive. I tell them the only villain that mattered was the version of us that stopped knocking on our own door. The hero was a minute that tolerated repetition. The love story is 2 men who put their hands where they belong and tried again at 8:17 when 8:07 got shy. Tonight at 7:59, I will set my phone face down like manners still exist. At 8:07, a palm will land at the back of the heart, and the river will pretend to be ours. If we miss, we'll try again at 11:11 or any time Mercy has office hours. Somewhere in a drawer, there's an invitation I didn't earn, and a card with my paddle number for a room that ended up belonging to us after all. I don't know if the Glassworks will ever host anything I want to buy again. I know the door at home opens when we knock twice and say where we are.